Um,
Okay, so good morning.
are we
Uh,
learning like an hour before Mincha on
I believe that that's the case. That we're learning an hour before Mincha. Ellie is in
Ellie's
charge
doing it?
for. Ellie will be doing both Yontif days and along with Sunday. So, um, and I will pick back up on Monday as this scheduling. Next coming week we'll be back and we'll be back to the 18 time slot on Monday, and that will be the last week that Dove is away, and so he will pick back up with Mondays and Tuesdays the following week. Oh no, he's away for 2 more weeks, so I'll be doing Mondays and Tuesdays for 2 more weeks. Okay, so let me share the screen. So first, let's go over the two questions that Hanan asked yesterday, and we'll give answers for both of them. So first, with respect to, we had a statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda who said a mamzer only comes from a relationship whose prohibition is a prohibition of erva and is punishable by kares. So Hanan pointed out, I don't understand. Isn't that the same thing? Because isn't every erva a punishable by kares? So I think that the answer from the purposes of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda is yes, actually. Every erva is actually punishable by at least kares. Now I will note that some arayot, which is sort of like the plural of erva, some arayot are punishable by the death penalty. The classic examples are a daughter, a mother, and the wife of somebody else. But the point being that, and so as a result, there is on some level a difference. But the bottom line is that I do think that Rabbi Shimon could have just said erva, but I think he was adding kares to highlight the element that it was different for him. That the definition on some level, it was almost definitional of what an erva is that it's a punishable by kares. So I think that that's what was going on with that. Then the second question allows us to do one of many Daf Yomi coincidences that we'll have today. This one is in connection with the coming week's parsha, namely the parsha that we'll read immediately following Pesach this year, which is Achrei Mos. And we have actually the source is in Achrei Mos. So in Achrei Mos, the Torah says that one may not. And so what was the question? The question was, what's the biblical source for a prohibition of a man marrying the relative of his divorcee? And so, yes, that is not actually explicit in the Torah, but what does it say? It says in the Torah that one may not marry your wife's sister during her life. And so the interesting, presumably the wife's life, that's the way we understand that pasuk. And so the point is that it doesn't say while the sister is married to you. So the implication is that it's an expansion on that prohibition, that it's not just simply that you can't marry your wife's sister when your wife is your wife, but rather as long as your wife is alive, even if you divorce her, you can't marry her sister. And we learn from that relationship to the other relationships of a wife. And so as a result, we say that all of those relationships are also prohibited even if you divorce your wife. And so that those are all that is the basis for the teaching. And so that is pretty much what I was trying to get at yesterday. And so that is the basis. And so you're absolutely right, Hanan, that there's no actual pasuk in the Torah that says you cannot have relations with your divorcee's relatives, but we learn it all from the fact that it says that you can't marry your wife's sister during her life. So those were the two things that we had to take care of from yesterday. Now we're in the middle of discussing a variety of incidents and whether they produce a child who is in the category of mamzer. we're going to begin with a case that contradicts something that we saw yesterday. Specifically, we saw yesterday that those who say a slave or non-Jew with a Jewish woman results in a kosher child say that's true even when the woman is married. While those who say that a slave or a non-Jew with who's marries a Jewish woman and has a child says that the result is a mamzer, they say that that's true even if the woman is not married, meaning it doesn't make a difference whether the woman is married, the same result applies. So now we're going to pick up 17 lines down on Mem Hey Amabet. As you know, again, we should be able to, God willing, get a full daf ahead today so that we can skip this coming Tuesday. And so we pick up with Amar Ravina. Again, it's opposite, at least on my the Torah or Hashalem on the left-hand side. It's about 2 lines down. It's 2 lines down from the letter bet that goes to the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. And so let's get going. So Amar Ravina, Amar Li Rav Gaza. Rav Gaza told me, Ikla Rabbi Yossi bar Avin la Asrin, that when Rabbi Yossi visited this location, V'hava Uvda B'fnuya V'achsher, that when he had a situation where there was an unmarried woman who had relations with a slave, is the way that this is understood. So then what did he say? He said that the child was kosher. The Eishes Ish Ufasel, and then a similar situation, but with a married woman, and he said that that was not kosher, that it was puzzled, that there was a problem, meaning that it was that the child was in the category of mamzer. So Amar Rav Sheshes said, no, you have clearly made a mistake, because as we just saw, as I just mentioned in the introduction, yesterday we saw that those 2 things would not go along, meaning whatever you're going to say with respect to a married woman, you're going to say with respect to an unmarried woman, and vice versa. And yet here we seem to be saying that Rabbi Yossi said something different. So Rabbi Sheshes is going to correct him. No, L'didi Amar Rav Gaza. Rav Gaza told me something different. Lo Rabbi Yossi bar Avin Hava. It wasn't Rabbi Yossi bar Avin. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Zvida Hava. It was Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Zvida. So Va'achsher ben Pnuya ben Be'eshes Ish. And he actually said that it was kosher either way. It didn't make a difference whether or not the woman was married. And similarly, Amrle Ravacha braid the Rav Ravina. So similarly, Ravacha said to Ravina, Iklol Ameimar la'asron. When Ameimar came to our neighborhood, Va'asher ben B'fnuya ben Be'eshes Ish. He also said that the kid was kosher. Didn't make a difference whether the woman was married or not. In those situations of having a relationship between a Jewish woman and a slave. Okay, so v'hilchasa, and of course the halacha is ovi kukavim ve'evid habal bas Yisrael hablad kasher ben b'fnuya ben be'eshes ish. Doesn't make a difference whether or not the woman is married, if the relationship is with a slave or a slave or a non-Jew, the child is in fact kosher. And so of course the question that isn't answered by this statement of the halacha is, what about whether or not that child could marry a Kohen? And that is a machlokus among Rishonim as to whether or not the child's able to marry a Kohen. And so, if it's relevant, you'll want to ask your local posek. I don't know whether we have. I don't know offhand what we generally do in that regard. So okay, so Rava Aksharei l'Rav Mari bar Rachel Humanye before say Devavel. So Rava said that this fellow Rav Mari bar Rachel was was kosher, and he appointed him as an officer in Bavel. So why is any of that relevant? Well, the key element is that we'll see so first of all, let me just note that the guy's name is Rav Mari bar Rachel, and he's known as Rav Mari without a parental appellation in general. And the reason is because his father was not Jewish. Rachel was captured. She did and one of her captors had a relation with her, and his name was Isser, and eventually Isser converted. But the point is that when Rav Mari was conceived, he was not Jewish, and so as a result, there was this question of what's the halacha associated with a non-Jew who is married to a Jewish woman. That is the bottom line is that she is. The bottom line is that we treat the child as kosher, and
it sounds like Isser was not just his name, but that was
exactly 100%. There's definitely some suggestive language in that name that he is given. And so what's the the appointment was made, even though we generally say som tasim alech melech, that you appoint yourself a king over you, and the pasuk concludes. Let me get the right. The pasuk concludes. From amongst your brothers, you put over you a king. So what is that? So kol mesimos sha'ata masim al yehu ela mikerev achecha. So the only people that you should appoint as leaders are people who are your brothers, meaning hi kaven de imam Yisrael. So the bottom line is that even though we say that even though his father was not Jewish, so you might say, well, he's not from your brothers because his father wasn't one of our brothers. But we'll say no, because the child is considered kosher, we're going to say that it applies. And so this is, of course, relates to the very famous issue of srara and who can be appointed in leadership positions, and so very important to keep in mind. But this is certainly not the place where we're going to go into that detail. But the bottom line is that in general, what we say that we don't appoint a convert into a position of srara, a position of leadership. But then the question, of course, is to define what constitutes srara, and of course, do we have to be consistent? So, Rav Moshe has one standard for srara with respect to a convert and another with respect to a woman, because of the concept that we have of a haftam ger, so we should be more lenient with respect to a convert. So in any event, those are a variety of issues that come up in connection with this topic of srara. Again, topic beyond the coverage of a Daf Yomi class, but is certainly one that's worthy of further discussion. So so now we have some more stories. So Avdei de Rabbi Chia bar Ami at Bala he ovedes kochavim l'shem antsa. So there was this Rabbi Chia bar Ami's slave had a non-Jewish woman go to the mikveh to purify herself from being a nida, and where is it kosher shouldn't be there, but and they then had a daughter. So that slave with this woman had a daughter. So what did Amar Rav Yosef? Rav Yosef said, that I can say that both she and her daughter are fit. Why? That she's fit like Ravasi. Da'amar Ravasi, Milo Tavla Limidusa. Did she not tovel at some point because she was a nida? Meaning that even though and we'll get that statement in a moment, but the idea being that even a tvila for nida, which is what happened here, is sufficient for conversion. So bevarta ovikuchavim ve'eved habal bas Yisrael havlad kosher. And with respect to the child, her daughter, well, we could say that she's kosher because if she's Jewish and then she has a relations with a slave or a non-Jew, the child is kosher. So as a result, even though at the initial start of our story, both of these people were not even Jewish, we can say that the child is a kosher Jew. So, Havu Karube Le Bar Armayasa, there was a person who was always known as the son of an Aramaisa, an Aramean woman, and that indicated that she had not herself gone to the mikveh and completed her conversion process, but she was treating herself as Jewish. So Amaravasi Milo, this is the statement, Amaravasi Milo Tavla Linadusa, right? Didn't she actually go to immerse as an Ida? Meaning she was acting as an Orthodox Jew, and so as a religious Jew, she went to the mikveh, and so as a result, she had gone to the mikveh, and so even though maybe her conversion hadn't finished the process by through a specific going to the mikveh for that, she had gone to the mikveh, and so as a result, that was sufficient for her mikveh attendance, so that she would be considered Jewish. Similarly, Hahuda Havu Karole Bar Arma, when it came to a fellow who said that he was a son of an Aramean man, meaning that he was a son of somebody who's not Jewish. Similarly, about him, Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Milo Tavu L'Kiryo, didn't he go to the mikvah in order to address his own seminal emission? And so as a result, must be that he had done at least going to the mikvah. Now, this has begun our transition from slaves to conversion. And so now we are going to begin to dapim, discussing the details of conversion. So let's get going. So Amaru Chama Bar Guria Amarav Halokech Evamin Haovikochavim, if in fact you acquire a slave, the Kadam the Taval L'Shem Ben Chorin, and before he has a chance, before you have a chance to, now let's just back up and remind ourselves of an important law, right? The important law is that a non-Jewish slave owned by a Jew is considered on some level Jewish, in that slave needs to observe all the negative commandments and all the positive commandments, except for the ones that are time bound. And if that sounds like what a woman is obligated in, bingo, you got it right. So that is those are the obligations. But that implies, of course, there needs to be some level of conversion from the status of just a non-Jewish slave that is owned by a non-Jew to a Jewish slave. And in addition, although we allow Jewish people to own slaves, we say that non-Jews do not actually have the right to own one another. And so as a result, we have the following situation where a non-Jew sells a Jew to a non-Jew sells a non-Jewish slave to a Jew. Well, the non-Jew only owes, and we'll see this in a moment, because you're going to give the explanation. So the non-Jew only owns the right to the produce of that non-Jewish slave. But the Jew, the Jew, when he buys that slave from a non-Jew, can only buy what the non-Jew is able to sell. But then if he actually enables the non-Jew to go through the conversion process, so then the non-Jew will actually become a non-Jewish slave that is owned by the Jew. So that's the process. And then, but the bottom line is that if when the conversion process happens, the non-Jewish slave doesn't have in mind to specifically stay as a slave, but rather has in mind that he is doing the tefillah to actually do a full conversion, well, in that situation, magic happens and he becomes a free person. So let's see how that happens.
So you're saying a non-Jew can never own another person?
That's exactly right. We're going to see that in 2 seconds.
So any time that, so technically non-Jews cannot be slave owners.
That's exactly right.
Only Jews can be slave owners.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Now, of course, the non-Jews have their own laws, so that it's not. But yes, you're absolutely right that from a halachic system in a Jewish operated country, you would not have any non-Jewish slave owners if there was slavery was allowed. So, okay, so let's take a look at it inside, right? So the kadam v'tavel l'shem ben koren, and now this non-Jewish slave, rather than having in mind the conversion to the status of the slave, thinks I'm going to convert and just become a full Jew. Well, if he thinks that, bingo, he is a free man. So kana atzmo ben chorin. So he has thereby effectively acquired himself. So my time, what's the reason? And now we turn to Memvovim at Aleph. Ovid kochavim gufa lo kanile. That a non-Jew actually cannot own this person. So, right, he can simply own the rights to his produce. So my dekanile who Yisrael, and only what he owns is he able to sell to a Jew. So all he's able to sell to the Jew is the right to the produce. The keva, the kadam, the tavel, the shem ben chorin, and now since this person, this slave, has gone and done tevilah in order to become a free man, in order to become a full Jew, so afke l'shibude, so the lien gets removed. And so as a result, there's nothing left. So Kida Rava, as Rava says, the Amar Rava, hektish chametz v'shichrur mafkiyan midei shibu, that the following concepts all have the possibility of eliminating a lien, namely, if you make something hektish, if something becomes chametz on Pesach, so that's our coincidence number 2 for today, or shichrur, or if a slave becomes freed. So let's quickly go through these 3 cases. It's not really relevant to obviously only the last of those is really relevant to our topic at the moment, but the bottom line is the following. If I owe you money and I say that you can claim from my cow, if I don't pay you, that is known as an apoteki. And if I give that right to you, and if you give you that lien on my cow, and now I say about my cow that my cow is going to be hektish, and I'm bringing that cow as a sacrifice. Now, it's not enough for me to say that the value of the cow, but I have to actually make that cow is going to be my sacrifice. And if I say that, well, then it now becomes a holy cow, and that is not going to be, you're not going to any longer have a lien on that cow at all. Similarly,
how can you do that if you don't own the cow outright? If there's a lien on the cow, how can you do that?
The answer is that if all that's given is a lien, basically there's a difference between a lien and a lien and collateral, and all of it all makes a difference. What our intention is makes a difference in those categories. And so here, I did not intend to give you actually ownership of the cow. You only have a derivative right, and your ownership only begins when I fail to pay and you collect from the cow. You do not own retroactively. Whereas if I were to do a retroactive transaction with you, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't be able to do that hektish process, because I wouldn't own the cow at the time that I am doing that hektish. So you're absolutely right that it's very key what category the animal is in. So here, we're talking about an apoteki where that means that you have a lien, but you do not have any ownership rights in the animal until I don't pay, and that's when it changes.
But I can't sell my apartment if the bank has a lien on my apartment, right? I mean,
you are correct that certain kinds of claim rights effectively give ownership. You're absolutely right that it depends on the nature of how I tell you what right you have in the property. So there are effectively different levels of liens. Some liens will effectively prevent me from selling, or even if I sell, will allow you to go to the buyer and collect from them. But others will not. And so that you're absolutely right to differentiate. I am not an expert yet on this. God willing, as we finish Nashim and go to Nezikin, I'll be much better on it. And so that then we'll get to have this conversation in much more detail. But the same thing happens with chametz. So now I have somebody has a lien on my chametz, but we'll talk about this person as being not Jewish, so it's not really a problem for them to have a lien on my chametz. But I own the chametz at noon on Erev Pesach. Well, bad luck for me that I do that because I get punished, because essentially I no longer have benefit rights, but that ownership still sticks with me. And so as a result, the lien has disappeared, and now I have to destroy that chametz, and I have to get you other chametz. Not you, but some non-Jew who has the rights to that chametz. That lien goes away, and effectively I am stuck and in all of these cases, I still owe the money. So that's case number 2. And then the case of freeing, again, that's exactly what you'd expect. If I have a slave that I have given you the right to collect for as a lien, so then if I free the slave, so I still owe you the money, but now the lien that you have on that slave is dissolved. So again, that's the reason. So now we have this moment where I have a lien on this person, but when he becomes a free man by immersing himself and having in mind a full conversion, well, then all of a sudden he goes free, and I end up with nothing. So Masav Rav Chisda. So now Rav Chisda challenged this because we had the following Masav Valoria Hagioris, that there was this woman who converted. Valoria. Valoria, the convert. What happened? Her slaves went to the mikvah before she had a chance to herself go to the mikvah and finish her conversion. And the matter came to the chachamim, and they said, they acquired themselves as free men. So what is the implication of this story? The implication is that if she had indeed converted before them, well, then they would not have successfully become Jewish. So doesn't that contradict what we just said? We said that even a Jew who owns a new slave, when that slave goes to the mikvah, they have the opportunity to actually end up being free. So we get a very important additional clarification now. Rava says, let's move up so now we can see. So Rava, lifaneha bein bistam bein b'meforish. So before, if the slave goes through the process before the owner converts, so the slave, while still a slave of a non-Jew, goes to the mikvah, doesn't make a difference what the intention is. You end up with a free Jew because there's no one to be the owner. And so as a result, because the non-Jew can't own the slave, and so as a result, when this non-Jewish slave goes to the mikvah and it has any kind of thought whatsoever, doesn't even have to have a specific intention to become free, but they go to the mikvah and their owner is still non-Jewish, well, then they go free. But la'achareha, once the owner is Jewish, right? So then the meforish if they have specific intention to become a free person, well, then they become free. But bestam lo, if they don't have that intention, if they're not even thinking about it at all, well, then they convert as a slave and they become owned by the Jewish master. So, and now we have we're going to have a story. So first, we're going to challenge this. Well, it's yeah. Okay.
This
So
is
first,
pretty interesting. The non-Jewish slaves knew about this. All they have to do is convert.
That's exactly right.
And they're free.
Correct. And it certainly makes me wonder about, the Jewish, why didn't we have these rules in the Deep South, before the Civil War, and what, and why didn't we have like pamphlets? Because there were many rabbis, well, not many, but there were some rabbis who were very opposed to slavery. So why didn't they like publicize the obligation to Now, presumably, most of the slave owners were not Orthodox or not what we would consider today to be observant Jews. So that could be obvious. That I'm sure is a big part of it. But it would seem to me that that would have been a cool way to sort of address this issue in any event. So, all right. So now we're going to have.
Yeah, this is assuming that the Jewish law somehow applies.
That is true. Yes, I mean the question
because
we just take Dina Dina is an excellent point, and so you're absolutely right. But all right, let's take a look at so now this rule is going to be qualified in the following way. So Amar of Avia lo shanu ela belokach min ha'oved kochavim. That is only true if the Jew is bought from a non-Jew. Aval oved kochavim gufei kani. But if you have the non-Jew himself sell himself into slavery, well, then that will, in fact, allow the, then he's basically up a creek. He cannot convert for himself. He does own himself. And so as a result, he has the ability to sell what he owns. And so as a result, the Jew immediately does own the non-Jewish slave. So that you are able to acquire the slaves from those non-Jews who live with you. This is a pasuk in Vayikra, later in Vayikra, and atem konim mehem. What is this pasuk saying? This pasuk is saying you can acquire from them below heim konim mikem, but they can't acquire from you. Below heim konim zemizeh, and they also can't acquire one from another. Below heim konim mikem lamai. So what does it mean that they can't acquire from you? Now, if you wanted to say that it's referring to they can't even acquire a right to your labor, so is it really true that a non-Jew can't acquire a Jew's labor? Two psukim later, it says Ola Eker Mishpachas Ger, that when or if it's talking about a very poor Jew who sells himself, and he sells himself to an offshoot of a family of a ger. Now here, ger just means stranger, doesn't necessarily mean a full convert, but the bottom line is that mishpachat ger is understood. It's not, when we say that, we're talking about a family that isn't Jewish, because even if the ger is Jewish, the mishpachat ger is not. So elav lugufe. So it must be that the earlier pasuk, two psukim earlier, pasuk mem hey as opposed to mem zayin, so that pasuk must be talking about full ownership of the person. And we say that the Jews, have the ability to acquire. Now, Rav Acha says, I understand all of your proof, but ema bechasba uvitzvila. Maybe when we say an acquisition, we're talking about an acquisition for money with immersion. That it's not just the fact that you buy the slave. So kasha, in fact, it's difficult. Now, I will note that in fact we paskin that if a slave sells himself, he does have the right to his ownership of himself, and as a result, he can transfer what he owns, and as a result, in that situation, whatever the non-Jew has in mind when he goes through the immersion process doesn't make a difference, because he has successfully sold himself to the Jew. So the bottom line is that as long as this person is being sold by another person and not by himself, we do allow the non-Jewish slave to essentially escape with his own ownership if he goes to the mikvah and has in mind to become not a slave. So what is this?
There's nothing about like Torah, mitzvot observance or anything. It's just like become a Jew, right?
That's right. Absolutely. There's no voluntary aspect to it. And there's a question is who makes the bracha associated with this tefillah? And the answer that I heard that I like is that essentially it depends. Meaning if the non-Jewish soon-to-be slave wants to be a Jewish slave because he knows that Jewish owners are nicer and kinder because they hopefully observe the various commandments that are associated with owning the slave, well then, so then the slave himself or herself could make the blessing. But if in fact the slave has no interest in being a Jewishly owned slave, well, then the owner would make the bracha. So that's one possibility of how this happens. But now let's take a look. We're going to have two things. First, a rule. So Amar Shmuel, but l'takfo b'mayim. In order to show that you in fact are doing this in order to ensure this person is a slave and not a free person, you have to push down on the slave while he is in the water to indicate your ownership. And so we have now a story that highlights this whole aspect of everything that we've just studied. Update the Rav Ashi Baal Atbule. So it was a story that when Minyamin, the slave of Rav Ashi, was going to go through the immersion process. So Masre Nihailu Ravina Ravacha Grade Rava. So he gave Rav Ashi asked Ravina and Ravacha to watch over the conversion process. Amr Lahu Chazu Deminaichu Kaboyisle. Please. Look, if you don't do this right, I'm going to ask that you pay me the money for this loss of a slave. So Ramule are visa bitsabara. So they put a leash around the guy's neck. Arbule bitsamsamule. So they loosened it and then they tightened it. So presumably they loosened it so that he would be able to go into the water and have the water touch all of his body. But as soon as he did, they tightened it. Arbule, it's going to say now. So Arbule kihecha de lo halavi chatzitza, because they loosened it so it wouldn't be a chatzitza. Samtulei, and then they tightened it kihecha de lo kadem v'lema l'shem ben chorin anitova, so that he would not be able to say that he was immersing in order to be a free man. Bahadi de doli reishe mimaya, and then he got his head above the water. Anchule zulta de tinil aresha, and they put a pail of cement on his head. Amrule zil amtuluvei marach. Go and deliver this pail of cement to your master's house. And so as a result, they successfully enabled the conversion while retaining the slave as a slave. So Amrale Rav Papa Rava, Rav Papa says to Rava, Chazimar Hani Deve Papa our Abba. I happen to see. So now we're going to ask a question that relates to slavery. That Papa Bar Abba would pay off the head tax of various people, and then various poor people, and as a result, he would enslave them. So kinafki, now when those slaves go free, do they actually need a get shechror, a bill of emancipation, or do they not? So Amrle Iku Shachichi Lo Amri Lahu Milsa. It's great that you asked this question, because I would never have thought to teach you this law, and I might have died without having taught it to you. So Haki Amar Rav Sheshes. This is what Rav Sheshes said. Mohayr Kayu Dahani B'Tafsa Demalka Manach. That these people stand as slaves to the king's finances, to the king's ownership, to the money that the king has. So they're all considered the king's property. Malka Amar, and the king has now said, Mandulo Yahav Karga Mishtabed Lamanda Yahav Karga, that the one who pays the head tax gets to own those who don't pay the head tax. So as a result, they are in fact full-fledged slaves, and they will require a get shechror in order to go free. So Rav Chia Bar Abba Ikli Gavra. So Rav Chia Bar Abba visited a place called Gavla. Chaza Benos Yisrael de Me'abrin Megerin Shemalo Velo Tavel, and he saw that Jewish women who were pregnant by converts that had circumcised but had gone to the mikvah. And what else did he see? So that's item number one that he saw. And so then he saw item number two that he saw, V'chazat Chamra de Yisrael de Mazge Ovde Kochavim Meshasu Yisrael. He saw that these Jews owned wine, and the non-Jews would pour water into the wine, and the Jews would drink it. V'chazat Turmusin Deshalki ovde kochavim v'achlu Yisrael. And he saw these bean dishes that were being cooked up by non-Jews, and the Jews were eating it. Below Amar lahu below Midi. And he didn't say anything about any of these cases because he thought, although we'll see that there's a basis to say that all three of them are prohibited, he had also a basis to say that all three are okay. So Azla Kamei to Rabbi Yochanan. He came in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar lei, Rabbi Yochanan told him, you have to go out and tell everybody that the children are mamzerin. And the wine is all prohibited because of yayin nesek. And that the turmisin, the bean dish, is prohibited because it is bishul akum. So lefisha einim b'nei Torah. And by the way, the reason that we have to worry about bishul akum in this case is because they are not, in fact, knowledgeable in Torah, and they won't understand a distinction that we will cover in a moment. So we'll explain that in 2 seconds, but now let's go through each of the three cases. So al b'neim shehem mamzerin Rabbi Yochanan l'taimei, right? They are mamzerin because Rabbi Yochanan says the following: the Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan la'olam ein ger ad sheyimo mevi'itbol. You need to have both tvila and mila in order to have a full conversion. And indeed, we're going to see that you need to do Mila first in order to, and then Tvila. But since they did not fully convert, they are not Jewish. And so as a result, and again, again, we have a statement of Rabbi Yochanan, so he's of the opinion, and we don't hold this way again, but he was of the opinion that child is a mamzer. So that's why he said that the first one's a problem. And of course, it could be that when Rabbi Chia saw it, he didn't see that it was a problem because he didn't hold of that teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. But of course, Rabbi Yochanan was his teacher, and so he needed to go out and teach this teaching. And in terms of yayin, the wine, it is considered yayin nesek. Why? Mishum lech amrina nazira. We warn the Kohanim, stay far away from a vineyard, right? Score, lacharmer lo tikrav. Go around, don't approach the vineyard, meaning that we want to try and avoid coming close to any violation. So what's the relevance here? The point is that in fact, these non-Jews never actually touched the wine. They never moved the wine, they never poured the wine. All they did was pour water into the wine. Well, that indirect movement that they caused by pouring the water into the wine, so as a result, we're going to treat it as if it was yayin nesech, even though technically it was not, because we are trying to say, go away, lech, score. So the idea is we don't want to come close to a prohibition. So again, so of course, again, Rabbi Chia might have not done something in the first place because he didn't say this zera. He didn't have this further protection. Turmusan, and what about the termisa? Again, because they weren't learned in Torah. So ha b'nei Torah shari. Are you saying that if they were b'nei Torah, it would have been permitted? So Bahama Rav Yitzchak, Amar Shmuel, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Mishmei de Rav. We have a statement in the name of Rav. Kol hanechal kemoshu chai. Anything that's eaten raw, ein bo mishum b'shulei avdei kochavim. V'had termos ein nechal kemoshu chai. V'yesh bo mishum b'shulei avdei kochavim. But these beans you can't eat raw. They have to be cooked a lot. So as a result, shouldn't that mean that bishul akum applies? Well, there's another category that is excluded from bishul akum. So again, bishul akum does not apply to anything that you can eat raw, and it does not apply. Rabbi Yochanan ki'idach lishnam svirulei. Well, Rabbi Yochanan also thought of the following teaching. What was the Amar of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak Mishmei de Rav? There was another teaching in the name of Rav. Kol she'ein ola al shulchan malachim le'achol bo'as hapas. That anything that isn't fit to serve on the king's table, so then ein bo mishum b'shulei avdei kochavim. Now the exact scope of this category is subject to debate. Does it mean that it would never be served to a king? Is it never served to a king at a king's dinner, or is it just so breakfast cereal wouldn't be covered, or is it fully fully anything. So in any event, though, this was definitely something that was not served to this termusin was not served on, would never be served on a king's table. So the time of the aim b'nei Torah. So the reason is that they are not knowledgeable. Ha b'nei Torah shari. So that therefore, if in fact they were b'nei Torah, so they would be able to understand this distinction between things that are served on the king's table and things that are not, then we would have clarified that obviously termusin is permitted. But for other people, they wouldn't be able to understand the distinction, and so as a result, we need to say that it's prohibited so that they don't get confused. So okay, so we had this additional story that is all about for the first of the three cases, because that relates to conversion. And now we continue with the discussion of conversion. So Tana Rabbanan, Ger Shemal V'lo Tavel. So now we're going to have a three-way machlokes in terms of what's the status of somebody who has not done everything that they need to do to convert. So we have on the one hand, we have Rabbi Eliezer says with respect to somebody who has circumcised but not gone to the mikvah, harei ger. He's considered a ger. Why? Because when our ancestors, they left Egypt, the Rashi clarifies that Avosenu, it's not talking about Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, even though you might have thought so. It's talking about Bimei Moshe, the second of the widest lines in Rashi. Bimei Moshe, that when the Jewish people left Egypt and they went out of the category of Bnei Noach and they then accepted the Torah and they accepted Hashem's presence amongst them. So they all we know of is that they were circumcised. We don't know of any fact that they went to the mikvah. So
what? You're saying that the Yetziat Mitzrayim, they were not Jews?
Yes, at the moment of Yetzias Mitzrayim, they were not Jews. They weren't Jews until they got to Har Sinai and accepted the Torah.
But they did the Korban Pesach. I mean,
100%, absolutely. That was an exception, but they weren't full-fledged Jews. That's pretty much, that's the whole thing about Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Were they Jewish? The answer is that they weren't Jewish, but they observed the entire Torah. That's what we generally say. That's what it means when we say that they observed the entire Torah. The whole chiddush of that idea is the fact that of course they weren't Jewish because they didn't have the Torah yet. Until we actually get the Torah, there was no moment of conversion. So that yes, absolutely, that is 100%. The general understanding is we were not Jewish and until we were at Har Sinai. So let's go through it because we're going to get more. It's going to get even more exciting. So now, what about Tavel V'lo Mal? What if you went to if the convert only did the mikvah and did not do the circumcision? Well, Rabbi Yeshua Omer harei ger. That person is considered a convert. Why? Shekain matzinu be'imaot shetavlu v'lo malu. Because we see that the women, when they left Egypt, they must have gone to the mikvah, and they, of course, did not have any milah, and yet they were considered Jewish. But of course, now we have the third opinion, and of course, this third opinion is the way we paskin. So, chachamim tavel v'lo mal, mal v'lo tavel. Chachamim, excuse me, tavel v'lo mal, mal v'lo tavel. Ein ger ad sheyimol v'yitbol. You need both. You need both tvila and milah. Rabbi Yeshua nami melef ma'avos. Rabbi Eliezer nami melef mehimos. So, one second, why doesn't Rabbi Yeshua also derive the rule that that milah is sufficient on its own without tefillah from the fact that the men exiting Egypt also had milah and presumably no tefillah, and Rabbi Eliezer, why doesn't he learn from the imaot the fact that that tefillah alone is sufficient? And if you want to say, well, the whole teaching of Rabbi Yeshua is a little suspect, right? Because of course the women didn't have milah because they don't have an appendage to be mal like men, and so as a result, it's physically impossible. So, but we see that in fact, in other circumstances, Rabbi Eliezer does have this possibility of deriving a law from something that's not possible because of the following. And here we have our next Passover coincidence, Passover Daf Yomi coincidence. V'atanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer Minayin lePesach Doros she'ein ba ela min achulin. How do we know that you're not allowed to use Meiser Sheni money to bring a Korban Pesach? You have to use money that has no obligations on it whatsoever. So Namar Pesach b'Mitzrayim, Namar Pesach b'Doros. Well, we have the Korban Pesach that was brought in Egypt. So this relates to the Korban, your point earlier, Hanan, because on some level we're learning from these people who weren't even Jews. But yes, that's exactly what we're doing. And so we have the Korban Pesach in Egypt, and we have the Korban Pesach that's mentioned forever. Well, Ma Pesach ha'amar b'Mitzrayim ein ba ela min achulin. That Pesach in Egypt had to come from Chulin. And Rashi explains because V'lo midami meiser sheni, right? Third line up in the widest lines of Rashi, and it couldn't come from Demei meiser sheni because it couldn't come from money of meiser sheni. To akasi meiser sheni lo hava, because there was no concept of meiser sheni at that time because they weren't in the land. They didn't have the trumas and meisros. So as a result, of course, it had to come from Chulin. So af Pesach ha'amar l'doros ein ba'el min Chulin. So too, the Pesach for every generation has to come from Chulin. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva v'chitan and Efshar Mashiach Efshar. And Rabbi Akiva asked the obvious question. Of course, it couldn't come from Meiser Sheni money. There was no Meiser Sheni at that time. And so Amar lo, Rabbi Eliezer says, yeah, Afal Pisha Efshar Raya Gedola He the Nilmod Heimana. Yeah, you're right. Even though it was impossible, it's a great proof, and we can actually derive the law from it. So as a result, again, our question is, why doesn't Rabbi Eliezer learn from the fact that the women who left Egypt didn't need a milah, and therefore, and tefillah was sufficient? And the answer is, of course, yes, let him say that. Ella, so we now turn to Memvav Mebet, and we say, Bitavel below mal kuli amalo pligi de mahani. Everybody agrees, meaning both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua agree that tevila alone is sufficient. So ki pligi b'mal below tavel. That what they argue about is in the case of Mila alone. Rabbi Eliezer Yolaf me'avos. Rabbi Eliezer learns it from the fathers, from the men who left Egypt. Rabbi Yoshua ba'avos nami tefila hava. And Rabbi Yoshua says, actually, the men also had a tefila. Monolay, how does he know that? So that you need to go wash your clothing. This is in just before the Saraset Dibros in Shmos. In Parshas Yisro, we're told to go wash all our clothing. Now, when it comes to we have places where you do not need to wash your clothing. We require tefillah. Makom sheton kibus eno din sheton tefillah. Well, certainly in a place where we are requiring clothing be washed, certainly tefillah is required. Meaning that there are certain people who have to go. For example, if you have a seminal emission, you need to purify yourself and your body, but you don't have to do any washing of the clothing. And so, therefore, given that they wash the clothing, it must be that they wash that they also did an immersion in the mikvah. They also did tefillah. Maybe not so. So Vidilma Nikios Ba'alma, maybe they were just trying to get clean. So the answer is so that's not actually a proof. Elamahacha. So rather we'll say that it's clear to Rabbi Yeshua that they did an immersion in the mikvah because of the following. Vayikach Moshe es hadam vayizrok al ha'am. He threw blood on. This is immediately following. This is in Parshas the parsha that follows Yisro. I'm now just totally blanking.
Mishpatim.
Thank you, Mishpatim. Thank you. So Parshas Mishpatim. And so in Parshas Mishpatim, at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, it has the entire ceremony. And of course, that is where we say the literal words of Nasav and Nishma. That's where those words are put together. And of course, according to the Midrash and Rashi, that actually happened before we had the Aseres Dibros. The Torah is out of order. Of course, the Ramban famously does not say that. Ramban puts the Torah mostly in order and only says out of order in specific cases. And so the bottom line is that there it says that Moshe threw blood on the Jewish people. Ugamiri, and we have a tradition, the Ein Hazah below Tefillah, that in fact we have a tradition that there's no sprinkling without immersion. So we see that in fact there must have been an immersion. Rabbi Yoshua, Tefillah b'Yemos minala. And how about the women? How do we know that they also had the Tefillah? Svarahu, it's logical to Im Cain, but men nechnasu tachas kanpei Shechina. Otherwise, how did they enter under the wings of the Shechina? Meaning, how did they become Jewish if they didn't do Tefillah? It's interesting that it doesn't say that the same sprinkling of the blood can teach us the same thing, but obviously that sprinkling is not viewed as necessarily being about the women, and so as a result, we have to say that it's a svara, that it's just logic, and so they must have done something. So therefore, tefillah is sufficient. So
this tefillah was dam?
No, it was not tefillah with dam. It's the idea is that whenever, for example, in connection with the par with the paraduma, it talks about sprinkling, and it talks about tefillah. And so we say basically anytime we have that concept of sprinkling, we're also going to say that there was tefillah. And so it doesn't mean that the tefillah was in the water that was sprinkled for paraduma. It means that there was tefillah in the mayim that would be appropriate for tefillah. And so similarly here, in connection with this sprinkling, we're going to say that there was also tefillah.
Like before the sprinkling or after or something?
That's a good question. I would presume before. Yes, certainly the understanding would be you would have the tefillah before the sprinkling. So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan la'olam eino ger ad sheyimol v'yitpol. Then in fact, this is how we paskin, that you need to have. And as we saw just 2 seconds ago in the story that we had, where Rabbi Chia went and saw the three things that were happening, and Rabbi Yochanan told him the olam eino ger ad sheyimol v'yitpol. Exactly this statement. You convert we paskin like the chachamim. Now pshita, isn't it obvious? Yachav v'rabim malacha k'rabim. Don't we say that isn't the chachamim a multiple of people, and so as a result we always follow the majority? Well, no. Man chachamim Rabbi Yossi. Really, the chachamim here is just Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya Hare Shabba Amar Malti, if below Tavalti, if a man comes and says, I was mal, but I was not Togo, so then what do we say? We can do just the Tvila and not worry about it. Zivri Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says, because again, for him, the immersion alone is sufficient. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ein Matbilin. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can't do Tvila. So lefikach matbilin ger b'Shabbos. So according to this, we will do immersion of a ger on Shabbos. Divri Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. But Rabbi Yossi Omer ein matbilin. We won't do it on Shabbos because for Rabbi Yehuda, the conversion is not because circumcision alone is also sufficient. So when you just do tefillah, that's not fixing the person. But for Rabbi Yossi, when you have Tevila, you're fixing the person, and so as a result, that's the issue. Now, Tosfos asked the question. I don't understand. We say elsewhere that you can do tefillah for, like Anita is allowed to do tefillah on Shabbos, and we say that they're allowed to do tefillah on Shabbos because we basically say that it's like going for a dip in the water, that you're allowed to go for a dip in the water, and maybe that's all that they're doing. But Tosfos suggests two reasons why that might not be the case. One is we have two witnesses standing there, so it looks like something that is more like something that is being fixed. And so therefore, that's the explanation so why this might be considered different from that. So Amar so we said Lefikach. What do you mean Lefikach Mapilin Gerba Shabbos? Therefore, we immerse the convert on Shabbos. Again, Pshita, isn't it obvious? Kevin to Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'chadasag. Clearly, obviously, Rabbi Yehuda says that either circumcision or immersion is sufficient. So isn't it obvious? So Heika Demal Vanenu Matbilin. So where the person has done Mila in front of us, of course he can be Tovel on Shabbos. So my Lefikach, what do you mean Lefikach? So Ma'odetema Rabbi Yehuda Tefillah Ikar. I might have thought otherwise that Rabbi Yehuda says that that the Tefillah is the main thing. And therefore, utfil b'Shabbos lo, and therefore you wouldn't be able to do it on Shabbos because the come attack and gavra, because you're fixing the person. So kamash malan to Rabbi Yehuda oha bai. That in fact Rabbi Yehuda says that either of them is sufficient on its own, and we don't even necessarily have a preference for one or the other. Rabbi Yossi Omer ein matbilin. Rabbi Yossi says, of course, we do not do it. To Kavan to Amar Pshita, again, isn't that obvious? To Kavan to Amar Rabbi Yossi Tarta Be'inan, we need both of them. To Kuni Gavra b'Shabbos lo Masaktinina. We don't want to fix the person on Shabbos. Well, no, we could say that in fact, maybe we could do the fixing. So Ma'adutemel Rabbi Yossi Mila Iker. Maybe Mila is the main thing. V'hasam hu delo have Mila b'fanenu. And the case that came to them was because they didn't have circumcision in front of them. Aval hecha to have Mila b'fanenu. Maybe when you had circumcision in front of us, so Emel litbol zeh b'Shabbos. We would allow him to go to the mikvah on Shabbos. Kamash Milan, the Rabbi Yossi, Tarti Bai, that in fact Rabbi Yossi has full requirement for both, and as a result, that is why he needs to do both, and that is why he cannot do it on Shabbos. And so we will pick up from here. When tomorrow's daf, we continue with more rules of conversion. These are some of the core dafim about conversion in Shas. And so I don't know that we'll all become experts as a result of this, but at least we'll become familiar with the main aspects of it on Shabbos. And continue into Yontif, and I so wish everybody a Chag Sameach.
So the Chachamim say that there's no Ikar.
Excellent.
There's no Ikar. It's just you need both.
Correct. The Chachamim say there's no Ikar, and you need both, and both of them are crucial, and without either of them, it is not. You have not done the conversion. Now, obviously, right. Again, it's where you have EF for a woman. Obviously, all you need is tefillah. Right.
Yeah. Okay. And then the tikkun kli is like it's really
correct. We do not put, for example, we do not put utensils in the mikvah on Shabbos, because again, it looks like you're fixing the kli, because you can't use the kli beforehand, but then afterwards you can. And so as a result, that is why we don't do that on Shabbos. So
I think it's more like a change of status than tikkun kli. But
yeah. I mean, it's not 100% that we're changing that on some level. We're changing the status of something, and so it looks very inappropriate on Shabbos. This is only my understanding is that this is only a rabbinic prohibition. It's not a biblical prohibition, but it is sufficient that we do not in fact do this on Shabbos.
Right. So you needed a minyan, and you got him to the mikvah, you could get your minyan, like.
Yeah, 100%. The answer is that I don't think that if that was our minyan man, we would not do that conversion on Shabbos. That we would not in fact do that. So, all right, enjoy. Have a great Yontif.